Hi everyone, David Aragona here for the March 15th preview section of Derby Watch. As I said in our review segment, Bradfree on vacation this week, so I'll take you through this pretty brief preview as there really are no prep races on tap this weekend, at least none offering Kentucky Derby qualifying points. It's the rare weekend in Derby prep season where there are no qualifying prep races. So no races to preview coming up on Saturday or Sunday, but I do want to take this moment to just press pause and check out our Kentucky Derby top 20 list and add in the number of points that each horse has accrued up to this point in the Kentucky Derby season, and just talk a little bit about who really needs to do well in this last round of Kentucky Derby preps to secure their ranking in Derby Watch. And you could see one of the reasons why Forte is such a prohibitive favorite at this point, 3-1 with 7 weeks left to the Kentucky Derby, is that he's already earned his spot in that race. He's got 90 Kentucky Derby qualifying points based on his victory in the Fountain of Youth and last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile and so on. So Forte is in the race, as are horses like Practical Move, Tapit Trice. Really does feel like, even with an increased point value to some of the races this year, that 50 plus points is pretty much guaranteed to be enough to get a spot in the Kentucky Derby field. So there are plenty of horses on Derby Watch, even some of those that are bigger prices like Angel of Empire and Raise Cane, who have already done enough to secure a spot in the Kentucky Derby field. But I do want to mention some horses that still need to do some running in their final round prep races and achieve results in those races to secure a spot in the Kentucky Derby, like the horse that's currently ranked 6th, Reincarnate, who's listed at 15-1. Only 15 Kentucky Derby qualifying points due to the fact that he had that rough trip in the Rebel. He's really going to have to rebound, likely with a top 2 finish in his final prep race. The same goes for Skinner, who's playing catch up to get into the Kentucky Derby, just 15 points. Some might even put Hit Show in that category, a runner that ran earlier in the Derby prep season, getting just 20 points for his Withers victory. And then going down the list, there are horses like Verifying, somewhat unlucky in the Rebel as well. He has just 14 points. So Brad Cox still has plenty of runners on the list, but quite a few of them still need to achieve the necessary points to get into the Kentucky Derby. And then we've got 2 runners on the Derby Watch that still have 0 qualifying points. One of those is Kings Barnes, who just hasn't contested a stakes race yet, a horse with a lot of potential who we'll learn more about when he is expected to contest the Louisiana Derby in about 10 days' time. But National Treasure, who's ranked 12th, is really a horse whose position on this list is somewhat tenuous. He had a setback, a foot issue that caused him to be scratched from the San Felipe earlier this month, missed about 3 weeks of workouts, finally posted a drill, since first drill since February 19th, when he had to work out a 6 furlong drill this past Tuesday. So it's a good sign that National Treasure is at least back on the work tab, but he is really under the gun to get those Kentucky Derby qualifying points. He has 0 at this point in time, so he arguably might need to win his final prep race to make sure that he does have a spot in that Kentucky Derby field. So now that we've taken a look at the point situation and talked about some of the next starts for the horses on that list, let's move on to our On the Bubble segment that we do every week on the Derby Watch preview. And I want to talk about some horses that could be running in those March 25th prep races who might be flying a little bit under the radar. On March 25th, there are going to be 3 100-point to the winner Kentucky Derby qualifying preps, those being in the morning, at least on Eastern time, at Meydan in Dubai. They'll run the UAE Derby on Dubai World Cup night. A little bit later in the afternoon on that Saturday, March 25th, we'll see the Jeff Ruby Stakes at Turfway on the synthetic course, and also at Fairgrounds, the Louisiana Derby. Speaking of that UAE Derby, that is the path that a lot of Japanese hopefuls for the Kentucky Derby have taken to get to Churchill Downs in recent years. And Brad and I have already talked about one horse that could wind up there, Perrier, winner of the Hyacinth Stakes back earlier on the Japan road to the Kentucky Derby. But I want to mention a couple of others that are listed as possibles for that UAE Derby. One of them is Adura Eride, who is a very intriguing runner that could contest that UAE Derby. He won one of just 2 Group 1 events for the 2-year-olds in Japan last year, the Hopeful Stakes, going the Kentucky Derby distance of 10 furlongs, but that was a Grade 1 turf race. The intriguing thing about Dura though, is that he actually has a victory on the dirt. I think he broke his maiden on the dirt in Japan last summer. So he's one that has handled both surfaces and could be an interesting runner in that UAE Derby. The same goes for Derma Sotogake, another Japanese trained runner. He finished third recently in the Saudi Derby on that Saudi Cup night. On the undercard, he was the best Japanese finisher in that race, finishing behind, among others, Having a Meltdown, that Bob Baffert trainee. And Derma Sotogake was finishing pretty well in that race. That was just going a mile. He's a son of Mind Your Biscuits, who American fans are certainly familiar with, and feels like one that could do better going the longer distance in the UAE Derby. So just a couple of Japanese contenders for that UAE Derby that you might want to keep an eye on. As far as the Jeff Ruby Stakes goes, a Turfway, I'm intrigued to see what we get from Major Dude. He is another Todd Pletcher trained runner who could easily vault onto Derby Watch with a victory in that Jeff Ruby Stakes. He's a turf specialist, a multiple turf stakes winner, coming off a high Beyer performance when he won recently a stakes event at Gulfstream Park, and he'll try to transfer his form to the synthetic surface. As far as the Louisiana Derby goes, I'm interested to see if Brad Cox runs Tappett's Conquest. He was arguably one of the unlucky runners coming out of the Risen Star, got a bit of a wide trip that day to finish fourth. Brad Cox is reportedly considering both the Louisiana Derby and the Wood Memorial at Aqueduct for his next start, so we'll see which of those two he runs in. And I should close out the On the Bubble section by at least mentioning Classic Car Wash, who was second in the Tampa Bay Derby this past Saturday. He does have 26 Kentucky Derby qualifying points, which does place him 10th as far as the ranking goes for horses that have achieved the most points up until now. But just given his lower speed figures, Brad and I decided to leave him off Derby Watch, at least for this week. So that's a look at some of the upcoming prep races for the upcoming weeks on the Kentucky Derby Trail. And Brad Freed will be back next week, and we'll, of course, talk much more about those March 25th prep races. So thanks for tuning in to the Derby Watch preview. Make sure to also check out the Derby Watch review segment that I also taped for the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel. More from Derby Watch next week.